There we go. That helped. Okay, you guys, here's what I'm going to do. For those of you who are here live, I'm going to sort of start afresh and start the topic again. And after the fact, I'm going to go back and edit the video and just chop that whole first bit off. So we're going to pretend like I'm starting from scratch, okay? Thank you all for joining. I'm Susan Smith. Welcome to my studio, where I'm coming live every morning for 30 days. Today is day 17, I think, talking about topics that surround the art of machine quilting. So casual chats, they're not really lessons, but a lot of you are emailing me and commenting on these little chats and feeding me topics that we can talk about. So today we're talking about batting choices and how dense quilting ought to be in a quilt and kind of the factors that affect that. And I think I have at least one that might be a surprise to you that I hadn't thought of either until someone pointed it out to me. So, all right, where shall I start? I've kind of lost my train of thought here. Batting. There are so many choices available now. I know back in the day when you bought a purchased batting, maybe even some of them today still, will say things like, quilt no further than 8 to 10 inches apart. Some of them will say 3 to 4, but most of them that have either some polyester in them or a scrim or some kind of reinforcement or bonding will have this larger dimension, 6, 8, 10 inches. I don't know why you would want to quilt that far apart. You kind of lose the feel of quiltiness when you have these big, puffy, unquilted, sort of loose areas. My opinion. So this is going to be a little subjective. But more typically, we'll see quilting that's in the, 3 to 4 inch and down. I still feel like that 3 to 4 inch is really, really big and does not do any favors toward embellishing or improving the look of a quilt. Again, my personal opinion. But this topic kind of originated because someone emailed me and said, hey, I love the look of custom quilting, but I don't always like the feel of it because sometimes the quilt just gets stiff from too much thread and it's not as cuddly and cozy as I want it to be on my couch. What's a happy medium? What are factors that I could consider and adjust in this? So here are my thoughts about it. I tend to like to quilt 1.5 inches or down just because I think a quilt looks better when it's got quilted texture everywhere, as opposed to having like a big old stipple or big old circles that don't really quilt the whole thing flat. Then some areas really puff up and some areas are really quilted down. But here's my thinking. It really depends on other factors as to how cuddly your quilt is. So let's talk batting composition or fiber for a moment. I feel like the 100% cotton battings are the stiffest at the outset. Over time and with shrinkage and washing and use, they certainly do soften up. But when you first create a quilt with 100% cotton batting, it is apt to feel a little bit cardboardy. Conversely, if you've got something that's all poly or all wool, it tends to be very, very soft and have a very good drape. So does bamboo. So does silk, although we don't see that in too many bed quilts. So some of those are softer and therefore blends will be in between there as well, right? In that range. Those of you who watch me regularly know I love 80-20, 80% cotton, 20% poly blends for the bulk of my work. It kind of combines the best of all those worlds. You get the little bit of shrinkage and traditional rumpled quilt look when you wash it that you would get from cotton, but you get some of the softness and you get some of the loft and you get some of the doesn't hold folding creases memory qualities of polyester. So 80-20 to me is a great all-purpose blend that works super well. There's lots of others out there. There's an 80-20 that's cotton and 20% wool, which I also love, but a little more expensive. Then there's altogether wool, or there's bamboo, and different bamboos feel different. So that's different from brand to brand as well. So this is going to be a very general discussion of those. But a lot of those blends will tend to be softer in feel. So then we come to the density or the closeness of quilting and how does that affect the feel of a quilt. I feel like between 3-inch quilting and 1-inch quilting, you're not going to get a lot of difference. What's going to affect the feel of the quilt is if you have over quilting, like you're tracing back over and you're getting multiple stitch lines over top of each other, like for example, bubbles, or sometimes even feathers. When you stitch a spine and then you lay in the plumes on one side and then you lay in the plumes on the other side, you can get these 3 or 4 layers of stitching on top of each other. That can make your quilt start to feel stiff. Here's the surprising thing that a thread manufacturer told me that I had not really ever thought about, and that's this. The weight of your thread makes a massive difference in the final effect. So a lot of us long armors will use a 40 weight thread. It's readily available. It comes in all the colors. It's the most economical probably thread to long arm with. So that's my go-to thread as well, a 40 weight. But think about when you put a 60 weight or even an 80 weight thread, how much finer that is. And now think about those same feathers where there's some over quilting. There's just much less thread and stiffness going on there, and that can make a vast difference. So if you are considering custom quilting and maybe you've got lines that are all converging on a point or bubbles or anything that's got backtracking in it, seriously consider using a lighter weight of thread. So not only will it make your quilt softer, but it will actually appear better to your eye. Multiple stitching overs of 40 weight thread will start to look like a scribble. It's very visible and very bold. Sometimes you want that. It's an effect you want to achieve, but mostly you don't. You want the eye to just be seeing the shadows of the quilting, the indentation, the texture. And so using a lighter thread when you've got backtracking that you know is coming can really help. You don't see the thread so much. You don't see that scribbled look. You just see the texture and the contrast of the quilting. Okay, what else? Still back to density, I guess. From my personal experience, I do tend to go a little more close in my quilting. So on my personal quilts, I think I mentioned earlier, I'm usually 1.5 inches or smaller. And I'll do like the quilt that's hanging behind me. You can see it's got horizontal lines on it. They are just shy of 1/2 inch. And I love that spacing for horizontal lines. That's quite a bit of quilting. And I have people ask me frequently, doesn't that make a stiff quilt? Well, this one hanging on my wall so far has always been a wall quilt, but I do have one upstairs on my couch with this exact same quilting, and it's actually a linen blend fabric, which is fairly heavy too, and yet that quilt is super soft. So I did do it with a 60 weight thread, and I've washed the quilt a couple times, and it has an 80/20 cotton poly bat in it, and it's beautifully soft and cuddleable. So to me, 1/2 inch works perfectly fine. Doing swirls, that are 1/2 inch spaced apart, that, in my opinion, works fine. You'll still get a cuddly quilt. That first wash will really, really soften it up. Okay, let us look back at some comments. I'm so glad the sound is better, you guys, and I'm sorry I didn't do well to begin with. Ori, wow, just over half done. As in half done my chat? And if so, I started afresh right before you got in. Kimberly, good morning. I made it. Mindy, have you ever started quilting a design and not loved it? What do you suggest? Let me come back to that one. Let me just read through a few more of these questions first. Kathy, I love dense quilting. Ori, I'd also like to hear the discussion on thread weight that you started earlier. Yep, I did that. Michelle, great sound. Great. Good, good, good. Terry, love the quilt behind you. Where can I get that pattern? I'll come back to that in a second too. Ori, I love my 100% cotton. Haven't tried 80/20 in ages. Okay, I better start answering some of these or I'm going to forget them. So Ori, if you haven't tried an 80/20 blend, I strongly suggest it. I don't mean to come out strongly against cotton. Cotton batting is a wonderful thing. And when that first came out and was so flat and smooth and slim and easy to work with, we all fell in love with it. The one thing that I don't love about cotton is that when you fold a new quilt that's got 100% cotton batting, it tends to remember those creases. And something that's got a little bit of poly or wool in it, that is significantly improved. My opinion, but if you haven't tried 80/20, I would certainly think about giving that a try. Okay, and Mindy was asking, have you ever started quilting a design and not loved it? What do you suggest? This is such a great question and probably is a whole other topic, but I'm here now, so let's talk about it for a second. So there's kind of two places where this would happen. So if it is an edge-to-edge quilt and I'm doing some sort of all-over design, I usually just persevere and keep going. So when I've got a new design that I haven't really used on many quilts before, I usually start with something small and often something that is a charity quilt. And that's not something super duper precious to me or a client quilt, right? And so I'll try out that design and I'll know already whether I like the design or not, right? So if it's my very first initial try of it and I don't love it, I'll still persevere through the quilt. I'll see if I can make tweaks and changes and improve it. And then I'll call it good enough and move on to another design. Otherwise, when I'm doing client quilts and my own quilts, I'm usually using designs that I've used before, and I already have a pretty good sense of whether I'm going to like it or not. So no, on an edge-to-edge quilt, I don't undo. I think the only time I've ever undone is when I get going on it and I decide that my thread choice was not ideal. You know, when I actually start quilting it, it doesn't look as expected, but I see that very early on. So, you know, we're talking a little bit of undoing. We're not talking big quilt amount. Second application would be custom quilting. Have I ever started a design and not loved it? And the answer to that one is yes. Now, it doesn't happen super often because I use my plexiglass sheets, which lots of you have seen before. Might be another topic for another day. They're clear sheets that I lay over my quilt, and with a dry erase marker, I try out different designs. So I've already determined my scale or why some designs are not ideal and moved on to others. But still, sometimes when you get to quilting, it just doesn't look right, doesn't suit the quilt, doesn't fit the space, is too crowded, or is too complicated. And I think, I've got to complete this 40 more times on the quilt. It's too much. Easier to undo that one repeat then, right? Than commit to doing 39 more of them that take an endless amount of time. So on custom quilts, I have occasionally undone. But again, this is my caveat. It usually occurs to me quite early on in the process, like in the example I just gave. I'll do one repeat and I'm like, whoa, that takes way more time than I thought it was going to. I'll either, change midstream right then, or if I'm just not sure about my design, I'll go away and take a break and sometimes even sleep on it. And when I come back, it tends to just be clear to me what I should do, whether I should back up and undo it or whether I should continue forward. What I don't do is just have questions about it in my mind and just plow ahead through and then have to undo half or 3/4 of a quilt. I've never done that. So that's just my way of approaching it. Hope that helped. Okay. And Terry's asking, love the quilt behind you. Where can I get that pattern, please? Super easy. It's called Bumblebee Blossoms, and it is published by Krista Moser, Krista. And I think her website is The Quilted Life, but if you look for Krista Moser, you will certainly find her. She's published lots of patterns. They all have those 60-degree angles, and she writes excellent patterns. Excellent, clear, easy to do patterns. Okay. And thanks for all the tips. You brought my quilting to a much better level. I'm so happy to hear that. Nadia, I love 50/50 cotton bamboo. I'm happy to hear that too. That's not one that I stock regularly, so unless a client brings it, I don't typically use it, so I haven't used it all that often, but I can imagine that that's a really good blend. Good qualities in both cotton and bamboo fabrics. Carrie, I use cotton. Quilts are stiff until I wash them a couple times. I'm quilting my first wool batting and it's much softer than the cotton. I use 50 weight thread. I also do dense. Yes, so you can see, as Carrie is saying, all these factors play in, right? The loft of the batting, the fiber content of the batting, the size of the thread, the density of the quilting, they're all variables that intertwine to make your soft or not quilt. Ori, I've never liked my feathers. Need to retry it with a thinner thread. That is one good trick. If you find they're just looking thready and heavy to you, try it with a finer thread. See if that helps. And I use my serger thread and my long arm and bottom line in the bobbins. Super thin threads. They move great. Yep, they do. Ashley, do you ever do filaments on the smaller side? You're meaning my filaments design that's kind of the loop-de-loop-de-loop. It's less than 1/2 an inch, I would say. Typically when I do it, it's more like 3/8 of an inch spacing between, and it's a pretty consistent spacing when there's no huge areas in it. And I've done it a little smaller and a little larger, but not massively so. Like I haven't way scaled it down into a fill, but be my guest to try it. Mindy, I almost always use 80/20. Customers love it. Yeah, it's such a super all-purpose batting. Carrie, I just want natural fibers if I'm going to make a quilt from scratch. Yes, and isn't it wonderful that we have those options these days? I have one client who feels that way too. She only wants to use, sustainable, resource responsible fibers. So she almost always goes with bamboo. Great. great that we have those choices all available to us. Sandra's here from Brazil. You've been here before. Welcome. Mindy, thank you. I just went on. So Mindy was asking about continuing when you think you're not loving a design, but I'm over it, she says. And often that's true, Mindy. Like just finish the quilt, be done with it. Take away a lesson if you need to about for the next one, but I wouldn't undo more than I have to. Alanette, learning so much from your videos. Great. Sherry, good morning. Do. Oh, Ori was saying my earlier comment was 17. Oh, sorry about the wobble. 17 out of the 30 planned lives because she made a comment about coming halfway through. You can go back and find them all, by the way. They're all there. So most of them just have a kind of maroon colored pre-made thumbnail. When it comes to either doing the live or finding the time to make the picture, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to take a photograph and make everyone special. I'm just going to get the live done, right? So that's kind of how it goes. All right, I think that's about it for today. We're 23 minutes into it. I just have a hard time keeping these to 10 to 15 minutes, don't I? But I will be back again tomorrow. Again, if you have any questions or topics that you'd like to explore further, feel free to email me, info@stitchedbysusan.com. I'm happy to hear your suggestions. So there will be 14 more of these every day. Also, I've got a live workshop coming up, not this Saturday, but next Saturday. Yeah, I think that's right for dates. It's the 21st anyway of October. So watch in the next day or two. Information will be coming out on my various social media feeds about that with a link to be signing up for it. So it's just a deeper dive into freehand and specifically edge-to-edge quilting and some thoughts that surround it and where some of my inspiration comes from and how I determine what to quilt on a particular quilt. Lots and lots and lots of stuff in there. You've probably gathered I'm a fast talker, so I like pack it all in there. I'd love to hear from you. But meanwhile, if you're loving these lives, please do give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends, and if you click the little notification bell, YouTube will let you know whenever I'm going live. Okay, Joyce, I'll quilt more densely if the piecing is smaller. Yeah, that seems proportional, doesn't it? When the piecing is tighter and it stitches all those seam intersections down a little flatter too. Good. Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that. Ori, if you haven't already, a discussion about picking thread colors. I have done that one already. I may revisit it because there's lots to be said on that topic, but I have done it. So feel free to go back and review the past one, and it'll probably come up in the future, and it certainly comes up in lots of my live and unscripted episodes, which, by the way, there is live and unscripted happening this Friday. After I get off air this morning, I'm going to go type up my newsletter and let you know the details for that, but it will be happening this Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific time. So I'll be quilting live and on air. Feel free to join me then for some more quilting discussion. So whatever you're doing today, enjoy yourself thoroughly, and I will chat with you again tomorrow.